Hello, I'm Adam Gauger, and this is Gary Gauger, and we are with Gauger Percussion, and I thought I'd do a few little interviews that we can post online for people to see with some questions that I ask my dad about in terms of his history in the industry and what he knows about drums and how he came to invent some of the things he did over the last many years. So, hi Gary.
Hi Adam. So, yeah.
I was going to ask you, so I was just going to start from the beginning and ask where you were born.
I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, May 14th, 1943.
All right.
So if you do any calculations, that's about 74 years ago.
And what did you grow up doing in terms of, what did you do kind of before you found drums, I guess I should ask?
Well, I was sort of a lost soul until I found drums, but the thing is, I was fortunate enough to be in a little town which was west of Philadelphia, about 35 miles west, and it was called Pottstown, Pennsylvania. And the great thing about that town was they had some incredible musicians in the town, and an incredible teacher by the name of William J. Shinstein, and they also had a ballroom, and it was called Sunnybrook Ballroom. It was within a few blocks of my house, and every Saturday night all the big bands played there, and virtually all the bands that were around at that time, which there weren't a lot left over from the 40s and the early 50s, but like the Dorsey Band came through with, Ray McKinley came through with the Glenn Miller Band, Stan Kenton Band, Maynard Ferguson's band. Every Saturday night a band came in there, and it was $2 to get in. And I heard some of the greatest musicians, some wonderful players that played at that time, and it was a very strong influence on me, and I got a chance to sit backstage and watch the drummers, and that was a real education in itself. So.
Were you doing that before you started playing? Or?
I did that after I started. I probably played drums for about a year without lessons, and I had played trumpet and saxophone before that. So I was about a year to 2 year proficiency on each one of those instruments, which later was very good when I ended up going to college and getting a degree in music education. I taught elementary instrumental for a few months at Valley Forge area schools, and that was pretty much what my specialty was, because I was able to get students started on any of the brass instruments or the woodwind instruments. I knew the fingerings for them, and also at the string program you had to have at least a year of violin, and I was able to do that. But the drums were my main focus, and the teacher I had, Bill Shinstein, was probably the biggest influence at that time. So.
Okay. Now, you also grew up, your dad owned a gas station.
My dad owned a Texaco gas station for a little under 50 years, I guess, and I worked in it from the time I was in 7th grade all the way through into college, and worked in there 6 days a week in the summertime, and then on Saturdays and Sundays on the weekends. And I was always sort of putzing with things, and it had a lathe in the back room, a thing called an armature lathe, and I was always fooling with that and making things. I remember making a pair of metal drumsticks because I wanted to build up my wrist and things like that. So I was very much involved with mechanical things and how things work. So that was very interesting to me.
Yeah, that struck me. I actually didn't know that about that you guys had a lathe back there.
It was, well, an armature lathe years ago, when you had cars had generators on them. Today they have alternators, which works differently, but a generator generated the current into the battery, and the battery sent the current into the electrical system of the car. But the generators used to wear out, and there was a thing in them called an armature, which you could take out and you could do certain things to it on the lathe, trim down the armature part of it, and change the brushes, and you could basically rebuild the generator. Because at that time I think they were like maybe $40 or $50, which was a lot of money back in the 50s. So that was sitting back there, and it wasn't always used, but I used that, and there were a lot of other tools, grinders, and you have somewhat of a machine shop in a gas station when you do car repairs.
Well, and I just always figured that your experience working at that gas station had a lot to do with your ability, or at least interest in figuring out how things worked and how they can work better.
Right, it did, and I was always building things to make things, just things that I would see and I would want to build. There was a river that ran past my dad's garage, and I remember building a raft, and I didn't have the guts to put it in the river because I thought I'd go down the river, never get back. But I built it out of inner tubes and an old door. I mean, I was just really intrigued by stuff, and then at home, I was building stuff out of wood. Woodworking became a real passion, so I was doing a lot of that stuff. But I really like to build things, and things that, as I later got into building more things, it's what took me into basically finding stuff for drums when I got involved in drums. So.
Okay.